Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to have you here. We are kicking off our next panel presentation. This is the Cannabinoids, the Future of Hemp and Medical Cannabis panel. We have three, distinguished is not the right word. The better phrase is leading experts in the world, everyone, on this panel. This is a panel that I've thought a lot about the last 6 months. Who are the experts in the world that would be the best to talk to on this topic of cannabinoids and where both the industry is going, but also where the patient rests in this topic, both about hemp and medical cannabis. Today we have with us Dr. Ethan Rousseau, Dr. Bonnie Goldstein, and Janelle Ralph. And I'd like to give first an introduction for each of them, and then we'll pick up in a question and answer format where we get into some really both interesting, relevant, but exciting, some truly exciting topics about where are cannabinoids going and what is the tip of the spear, the leading edge of this science right now. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Ethan Rousseau. He's a board-certified pediatric neurologist. After 20 years experience in clinical neurology practice, Dr. Rousseau transitioned to serve as GW Pharmaceuticals Senior Medical Advisor. He was also a medical monitor and study physician for numerous clinical trials for Sativex and the initial studies for Epidiolex. In 2015, he became the medical director of Phytex, a company devoted to optimizing the function of the endocannabinoid system, the critical homeostatic regulatory mechanism in human physiology. He's a past president of the International Cannabinoid Research Society and is the former chairman of the International Association of Cannabinoid Medicines. He serves on the scientific advisory board of the American Botanical Council and is also the founding editor of the Journal of Cannabis Therapeutics and a visiting professor to the Chinese Academy of Sciences, Harvard University, and Johns Hopkins. Currently, Dr. Rousseau hopes to advance cannabis-based and botanical therapeutics via the development of optimized chemovars and extracts, as well as pursuing novel formulations and diagnostics related to the endocannabinoid system with his new venture, Credo Science, which we're going to learn more about. Dr. Rousseau, welcome. It is a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having me.
We also today, everyone, have Dr. Bonnie Goldstein. She's a board-certified pediatrician and completed her residency at Children's Hospital Los Angeles, where she also served as the chief resident at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. She was a clinical instructor in pediatrics at the USC School of Medicine and emergency transport attending physician at Children's Hospital Los Angeles. In 2008, Dr. Goldstein developed an interest in the science of medical cannabis after witnessing its beneficial effects in an ill friend. Since then, she's been evaluating both adult and pediatric patients for use of medical cannabis. She's given numerous lectures to many patient support groups, including CannaMed and at Harvard University. She's a member of the International Association of Cannabis as Medicine, the International Cannabinoid Research Society, and the Society of Cannabis Clinicians. She's currently the medical director of Canna Centers, a medical practice devoted to educating patients about the use of cannabis for serious and chronic medical conditions. Dr. Goldstein, it is a pleasure to have you here. Say hello to the crowd.
Thanks for having me, Sean.
And last and certainly not least, everyone, we have Janelle Ralph. She is the CEO of Botanicals and the founder of Harmony CBD. Harmony CBD is the first vertically integrated, organically certified CBD line of products. Harmony CBD was born of a mother's desire, Janelle's desire, everyone, to alleviate her child's debilitating seizures. Janelle knew there was hope in him for Harmony, her daughter, and others like her, so she persevered in the early challenges of the industry. In 2015, she founded Palmetto Synergistic Research, Harmony CBD, and a full-spectrum USDA organic certified line of products with the same name, Harmony. 2019, Palmetto Synergistic Research merged with Botanicals, and shortly after the merger, Janelle was appointed CEO of the parent company. Botanicals is now one company with 2 organically certified brands, and Harmony donates 1% of products produced to families who are financially struggling. Recently, Botanicals, led by Janelle, along with the HIA, Hemp Industries Association, filed suit against the DEA due to overreach into the legal hemp industry. Janelle is a leader in the hemp space for many years and continues to advance the industry and help her daughter, Harmony. Janelle, it is a pleasure to have you here. Welcome.
Thanks, Sean. I appreciate it. Glad to be here.
It's good to have you here. It's good to have all of you here, everyone. Given our time and just the complexity and the nature of this topic, I don't think I could have picked anything more broad: cannabinoids, hemp, and medical cannabis. What we're going to do is just jump into some questions and see if we can help the audience get inside your brain a bit, help understand some of these topics first at a high level, and then drill down into where we are today and where you as the experts and the true leaders in the world on this topic think it's going to be going. So let's just jump in. First, I'm hoping Dr. Goldstein, could you just tell us a little bit about the endocannabinoid system? What makes it so important to us? What's important for children with it? What are we talking about here in terms of the ECS?
Well, I'll try to keep it short, but it's a big topic. There are books and articles and everything written on it. But basically what I think it boils down to is we have to understand that we as humans have multiple regulatory systems in our body to keep things in balance. So we have insulin that helps keep our sugar in balance. We have thyroid hormone that helps keep other basic systems running. And the way to look at the endocannabinoid system is that it is a system to help regulate any type of message that might be sending between two cells that maybe when a message is off, or you're sick, you're inflamed, you've had an insult or injury, this endocannabinoid system goes into action to help balance the cellular messages. So it's just another regulatory system in our body. Unfortunately, it was only discovered, about 30 years ago, the late 80s, early 90s. So, I'm sure Dr. Rousseau didn't learn about it in school. I didn't learn about it in school. It was really something that we learned after. And unfortunately, it's still not being taught about. But what's fascinating about the endocannabinoid system is we think of it as this discrete thing because we talk about it that way, but it's not. It's interrelated. And now there's even the term endocannabinoid dome, because so many of these compounds not only act within the endocannabinoid system, but outside of it. So we just have to remember that it's basically a survival mechanism that is working to repair, recover, protect you. And there's no reason that if there is a problem within the endocannabinoid system achieving that goal, that to me, cannabis is a beautiful answer to help augment that system to help you achieve that balance and that homeostasis.
Thank you, Dr. Goldstein. You mentioned we've only really known about it for 20 or 30 years, the ECS, the endocannabinoid system. I first learned about it, and I'm actually going to read this because I think it's good for people to hear in terms of the history. I first learned about it in the Health and Human Services patent that was filed in 2003. So not yesterday, as we say, 2003. And it's really great. It's just right there in the abstract where it says this newfound property makes cannabinoids useful in the treatment of prophylaxis of a wide variety of oxidative associated diseases, such as ischemic, age-related, inflammatory, and autoimmune diseases. Cannabinoids are found to have a particular application as neuroprotectants, for example, in limiting neurological damage following ischemic insults such as stroke or trauma, treatment of neurodegenerative diseases. But there it was, right there, the government telling us in 2003 that this is what cannabinoids are doing, are acting as neuroprotectants. And the history from there in 2003, I think it would be great for you to pick it up, Dr. Rousseau. You worked with GW Pharmaceutical in pioneering Epidiolex and running the clinical trials. Can you tell us a little bit about that and how we went from the patent and learning about the ECS and cannabinoids to developing the first medicine with CBD, Epidiolex?
Sure. Well, first, I want to back up and say that the origin of that quotation was from the patent that was filed by Aiden Hampson and folks at the National Institutes of Health, tax dollars at work. The ironic thing is this is in relation to THC and CBD, which at that time and still today are considered Schedule I forbidden substances, with the exception of Epidiolex, which is 97% pure CBD, which is now an unscheduled drug, not subject to the tight controls, but specifically for severe epilepsies. So anyway, to go back to your question, GW Pharmaceuticals was a British company, began in 1998. The unique thing there was that they had the support of the British Home Office. In other words, government support for a research and development program to make pharmaceuticals from cannabis. We've never had the same thing in the States, where it remains difficult to impossible to do appropriate clinical research on cannabis-based medicines. So, I mean, and this explains why for the bulk of the last 25 years, I've worked with foreign companies. It just wasn't possible to do this work in the mainstream in this country. But after 5 years as a consultant, in 2003, I was asked to come on full-time with GW Pharmaceuticals. And as you mentioned, I was involved in the development program of Sativex, which is now an approved pharmaceutical in 30 countries for spasticity or muscle tightness associated with multiple sclerosis, and subsequently for Epidiolex, again, for severe epilepsies. During that time, however, the company funded a lot of research on what we call minor cannabinoids, other cannabinoids. The plant makes upwards of 150 of these, so it's not just about THC and CBD. We know the pharmacology, how they work for perhaps 10 or 12 of these. And what I really like to emphasize is each of them has unique therapeutic properties and a very, very low level of toxicity. So in terms of what can happen in the future, we've just begun to scratch the surface of the therapeutic potential of this plant.
What does it mean, Dr. Rousseau, when we read or we hear that cannabidiol and the other non-psychoactive or non-psychotoxic cannabinoids are neuroprotectants?
Right.
Can you give some flavor to that? Because we hear that, we read that. What does that mean? And maybe even in a specifically in a pediatric or a patient context, like when is there neuroinflammation? When do we need neuroprotection?
Well, I'll try to be economical with the explanation because this could take up a whole hour. But neuroprotection encompasses a lot of different things. After an insult to the brain, whether it's a head injury or stroke, one of the effects is that there are going to be some cells that are dead and maybe can't be salvaged. There'll be many that are damaged but not dead. But after this kind of insult, for better or worse, the brain has a mechanism of releasing glutamate. That's an excitatory neurotransmitter. And when there's too much of it, it actually kills the cells that were on the edge. It's what's called excitotoxicity. They excite themselves to death. Both THC and CBD are capable of interrupting this. THC directly, what it does is reduce the release of glutamate from the nerve cells. And with CBD, it's more indirect. With CBD, we're never talking about one mechanism of action. It's always multiple. So one of the things it does is increase the amount of an endocannabinoid, anandamide, which itself is neuroprotectant. The other thing it does is it serves as a very powerful antioxidant, stronger than vitamin C or vitamin E. And that works through non-endocannabinoid system mechanisms to exert a protective effect. And then neuroprotection also extends to some of the degenerative diseases like Alzheimer's disease. Interestingly, both THC and CBD are capable of preventing the buildup of toxic waste products in Alzheimer's disease that are part of the degenerative process, such as beta amyloid and tau proteins. Again, we can throw out a lot of medical jargon, but suffice it to say that these show great promise in possibly slowing down the progression of these disorders.
Is it, Dr. Rousseau, in a way to think about neuroprotection in the context of, let's say, either children or in more of a geriatric population where there's neurodegenerative disease or geriatrics, there may be Alzheimer's or dementia. In a sense, is it really the opportunity is quality of life? we're not saying that it's not going to cure Alzheimer's. It's not going to cure an underlying genetic neurodegenerative disease, but it's really helping protect the brain to give a quality of life. Is that ultimately what it's doing by removing the toxicity and protecting the brain in this way?
Sure. So there are two things we'd like to do therapeutically, and Bonnie knows this so well from her patients. One is where possible to slow down the deterioration. And clearly, cannabis-based medicine and some of these children with degenerative diseases, with severe epilepsies, start to make gains back in their development that weren't apparent before. Part of it is direct effects of the drugs, and part is the ability to reduce the amount or eliminate other drugs that are sedating that have interfered with development. So on the one hand, again, is this sort of protective effect to see if we can slow down the effects of the underlying disease. The second is treatment of symptoms, and this is where cannabis shines because it can do both. It can not only possibly affect these conditions directly, but it also treats symptoms, whether it be agitation, pain, sleeplessness. I like to call them side benefits rather than side effects of cannabis.
Right. I heard someone tell me once there are really no side effects. They're actually all just effects. So we can even just get rid of the word side and
Well,
call
I
them.
guess an argument could be made in that direction, but everybody
Right.
understands what
I appreciate that. And I mean, I think, Janelle, I want to kick it over to you in a moment, but first, Dr. Rousseau brought up something I want to ask Dr. Goldstein, and it's that, have you seen this in your practice, Dr. Goldstein? Like, what have you seen in terms of the neuroprotective elements and properties, benefits, whatever that term is? This is what you do at Canna Centers. You treat children in this way. You treat elderly. What have you seen? What's the experience as a clinician with this?
So overall, the preponderance of my experience is that there are clearly numerous benefits in patients that come in for help with very serious brain disease. Neurologic disease is, mostly what I treat for the most part. In pediatric patients, remember, this is not for everybody. So I always say in general, what we're seeing is about 80% of patients responding with some beneficial effects. There's a small percentage of patients that don't respond, but I still always say it's worth a try because the toxicity is so low compared to many of the medications that if you're coming to see me with a child, your child is usually quite ill. And so they've been down the road of multiple toxic medications that, look, I have patients that come in and say, look, the seizures stop, but the side effects of the medicine are just beyond what we can tolerate, in our family. We have no quality of life. So going back to the quality of life part of it, you can get a pharmaceutical to work well, but sometimes you pay the price for that. So no question what I see in children, exact opposite of what many naysayers are gonna share with you is, oh, cannabis is bad for the developing brain. I disagree wholeheartedly with that. The patients that I'm seeing, look, I wrote about in my book, a little girl who came to see me. She could not read and write. She was having so many seizures, multiple medications. We got her on a cannabis regimen. All of her seizures are not gone. They're reduced significantly. But while on cannabis, weaned off other drugs, she developed the ability, learned how to read and write. If you learn how to read and write on cannabis, you're going to have to come up with a pretty good argument that it is not healthy for the developing brain. Remember, she has an underlying condition. The brain that you're putting cannabis into matters, right? If it's someone's healthy, maybe we might want to stay away from it until the brain is developed. But certainly in a child struggling with a severe neurologic condition, we know the endocannabinoid system is likely involved. We know that other systems are likely involved, and CBD and THC together can address that. I just want to share one really quick story. I recently helped a physician who's new to the cannabis industry treat a elderly gentleman with Lewy body disease, which is a neurodegenerative disorder that crossovers with dementia, but can be a little bit different. And just in 3 weeks' time, He went from a terrible quality of life with hallucinations, sundowning, which is where you get very agitated, not sleeping, wandering around the house, having to have 24-hour nonstop caregiving, to within 3 weeks of using cannabis, having coherent conversations with family, having great days, having nights filled with sleep, interested in going outside and walking around and participating in his life. How do we deny people this opportunity to try cannabis and continue to keep it where it is? Let's do the research. I don't know what everybody's afraid of with research. We'll find out that it works. And so, but like, talk about quality of life, not only for this gentleman, but for the family. What a tremendous change for them.
Thank you for sharing that, Dr. Goldstein. I have 30 things I could say in response to that, but I want to make sure that we hear from Janelle, because I think the few things that she'll have time to say today are better than all the 30 that I have right now. So I want to riff what you just said there over to Janelle, in that, Janelle, your daughter hasn't been a patient. This is your child. You've lived and breathed this. You've developed a product and really a process and a company around delivering, a safe therapeutic, effectively a dietary supplement to Harmony. And you've done this all as Epidiolex has come to market, as we've seen 500 million in sales from Epidiolex, and GW Pharmaceutical being sold for over $7 billion. But I think there's a knowledge gap. I'm hoping that we can address that on this panel, where Epidiolex is an isolate, and that's a lot bit different than what you have going on at Palmetto Harmony. So can you tell us a little bit about that breakdown, isolate versus broad spectrum, full spectrum, plant medicine, dietary supplements, and give us some context here of the larger conversation?
Yeah, I mean, I got into this because my youngest daughter in 2009 was born with a extremely rare genetic condition. It's called lysencephaly. And with lysencephaly, the disorder itself is not what shortens the life expectancy. It's actually the debilitating seizures that go along with the condition. So if you were to MRI your brain looks like a waffle, to put it in layman's terms, where Harmony, which is gyrrhea, where Harmony's brain looks completely flat. All 4 hemispheres of her brain are flat, where in utero, her brain did not develop the last layer. And with that comes, uncontrolled epilepsy. We're given a life expectancy of about 4 when she was first born. I mean, that's a hard thing to hear, that you have a child that is terminal. Harmony is still terminal. So I don't want anybody to be misled to think that, CBD, that what we found that has helped her and improved her quality of life has been the full answer to her. She is not cured by no means. She still lives with a terminal condition. CBD is one of many tools that we started implementing. Once we realized, we went down the pharmaceutical route, we thought the doctors were going to be able to help her and fix her. I think all parents that take this journey do initially, especially if you have healthy children and they've gotten sick and gone to the doctor and the doctor makes them better with an antibiotic. It's not until you have really complicated medically child that you realize that they call it medical practice for a reason. It's really practice. They don't have a lot of answers. And, there's some things that I wish that the doctors would have explained to us in the beginning, such as when you take a pharmaceutical, they're highly addictive. They come with a lot of side effects. You have to wean them off very slowly. If it doesn't work, you can't just stop taking it, that you have to start stacking drugs, which I think I would have made better decisions in the beginning. But, in 2014, we ran out of options. They told us we needed to look at hospice. And I started heavily researching cannabis at the time. And what I kept running into is this constituent, this compound CBD. And after talking to some agronomists that I knew, they said, well, Janelle, CBD isn't actually the compound in marijuana. It's actually the predominant compound in hemp. And it's non-psychotropic. And so it really got me thinking, well, why can't we have access to this? Why would parents have to move all the way to Colorado to get it? Why aren't we fighting for comprehensive hemp legislation? And why don't I get into this industry? And that's kind of flash forward what put us here. And then, if we're talking about a substance that is non-toxic, especially at lower doses of it. I mean, I know that there's the unique thing about CBD is you've got two different pathways here. You've got what Dr. Rousseau has done, Dr. Goldstein, which is the drug version of CBD. And then you have the plant, the natural plant, what I like to call the plant therapy, plant supplement. So when we talk about supplements, we talk about vitamin C, we talk about zinc, we talk about echinacea, we talk about all these different plant medicines or plant supplements that actually can benefit you that doctors recommend to add in to your treatments. And what I think that there's a pathway here for both. And so what we produce, we don't produce an isolated compound. We do a lipid infusion method. There's not a lot of chemical bases to it. It's basically soaking the herbs through heat and pressure in the actual suspending oil and extracting everything that's in the plant into that oil. It's a very basic method. We call it plant science. And in that aspect, we're not concentrating anything. It is, we're recommending very low suggested use on the product. And what I've seen with Harmony is it's actually changed her life. And so would I consider it a drug like any of the drugs that I had her on before that now we've been successfully weaned off, about 90% of them? No, not at all. It didn't have any horrible side effects. We could stop giving it at any time. As a matter of fact, when there was no supply in the early 2014s, we had to stop giving to her. If I would have cold turkeyed any of those pharmaceutical drugs, we would have ended up in the hospital. So there was all of these benefits. And on top of that, we saw the cognitive gains that was just surprising. I mean, Harmony didn't even never said anything for 2 years because of the drugs, not a laugh, not a cry, nothing. And after all we did was add the CBD into her regimen when we first did the extraction, a regular dose for a month and a half, she started crying and started laughing. We hadn't even heard that sound. And we did not change the pharmaceuticals at the time. So that I knew then that we were on to something very seriously that could help her and help her long-term. And now here we are several years later. This was 2015 early. We did a efficacy and safety study, observation study with Dr. Corbière and with patients in 5 states before we released our product. And, fast forward, now Harmony is not on hospice. She's 12 and she's still with us today. So that's kind of where we are.
So thank you, Janelle. That it's both it's a heartwarming story, but it's also a reality story that a lot of people hear this about CBD as if it's some miracle cure or wonderful, panacea, and it's not. It's a quality of life play. It's an integrative medicine play. There are many tools on the tool belt, and I think that's one reason why I'm holding this panel is to help people learn more and realize that, hey, this might apply to you too. Yeah, it really applies to children with neurodegenerative brain diseases or seizure disorders or in a palliative care geriatric sense, but there's also this idea of oxidative stress. And maybe you could talk a little bit about that, Dr. Rousseau. Like we read about that in the literature that's what's really being addressed by cannabinoids, oxidative stress. And can you put some meat on that bone, some medical backdrop on that? What's really going on here in terms of when there's oxidative stress in the brain that cannabinoids are helping do something to?
Well, everyone recognizes that we need oxygen to live, but oxygen also makes rust. And you can think of oxidative stress like rust in the brain or other organs. Under certain conditions, when you have a disease process, you'll get the formation with oxygen of toxic products. And there are many of these in the brain. One of the neuroprotective effects of the cannabinoids is basically to reduce this oxidative stress and subsequent damage. And there are hundreds at this point of basic research studies, either in the lab, in cells, or in animals to demonstrate these benefits. Now, it's been much harder to show this in people for a couple of reasons. One are the existing roadblocks to research, none worse than in this country, plus that these studies are very expensive to perform. No one's going to do it with garden variety cannabis. Rather, only a pharmaceutical company could manage these kinds of costs, and it just hasn't happened yet. So this remains an area of great promise rather than one where we can say, here's the proof in humans.
So speaking of that, we have these other countries or other places where maybe this research is more likely to take seed and occur, but where's that going? Where are we going as a hemp-derived therapeutic, as a medical cannabis industry, if that's the case? Like, what's the future of all this? And do share a little bit about Credo Science, your new
Sure.
venture, and where that plays into all this.
Yeah, unfortunately, so much of this is tied up in politics. Short of descheduling cannabis and getting more research funding through the National Institutes of Health, things are not going to change in this country. We can use the example of Canada. There are 260 licensed producers of cannabis, but most really aren't extending any clinical research budget, or what they'll do is give one of their products to some number of people, and they'll do tests before and after, or just surveys, and they'll say X% were better. But that really doesn't cut it in the world of physicians who need much better proof to feel confident that a medicine is safe and effective. At Credo Science and throughout my career, my aim has always been to make cannabis safer and better. And that includes a lot of things. It includes quality control, above all, organic culture rather than synthetics. It means using optimized preparations, meaning the best balance of the most therapeutic cannabinoids and terpenoids that are going to not just treat the disorder, but reduce side effects, especially associated with levels of THC that are too high. So again, without the government support, and we haven't had great support from the industry, it needs to come from other quarters, I'm afraid. One result is that we have so many people trying things on their own, or in Janelle's case, starting their own companies to pursue the ability to disseminate products that may offer people better relief than what's commonly available.
What do you think will be happening the next 5 to 10 years? Because we have many people listening that they may be investors, entrepreneurs, business owners like Janelle, but do you have to be in the pharmaceutical business to really play at the bigger level? Where's the opportunity in dietary
Sure.
supplements? What
Yep.
do you think? How will this unfold?
Well, we have three echelons of activity: pharmaceutical, FDA approved drugs. That's, as we've said, extremely long and expensive, not fleet of foot, let us say. Then there's the supplement industry. So hopefully products that have some good measure of quality control and standardization of their contents, so that data can be generated as to how they work. And finally, there's the herbal approach. This would be cannabis flower. And obviously, there's tremendous variation there, and there are good ones and bad ones. Not everyone has an experienced herbalist at their fingertips to help with that, but any of these can be effective. And it's important to note that while one echelon of the industry would like to eliminate the others in some instances, that's never going to happen. What we need is a peaceful coexistence, because each offers things that can be good for the potential consumer.
Yeah, we call that in the economic analysis world swim lanes, that there's these swim lanes, pharmaceutical, natural products, and medical cannabis. And it seems good when everyone stays in their lane, but this pool, it doesn't have those, those lane dividers. Sometimes there's crossover. We see that. But with Canna Centers, Dr. Goldstein, where do you see this going with your business, with your practice? What's the horizon look like for you in terms of treating patients with hemp-derived products and medical cannabis?
Well, I'm only one person, and I can only take care of so many medically complex patients. And that's usually what the majority of my patients are medically complex children. What I'm seeing is very positive, though. I am seeing physicians evolving and accepting this as another tool in the toolbox, because it's very hard today to be a physician with an active practice where you do not come across parents or loved ones or even the patient asking you about medical cannabis. It behooves all physicians to educate themselves on some level so that they can understand what cannabis can do, what it can't do, and more importantly, trying to undo the brainwashing that we've all learned in training in medical school, that cannabis is a drug of abuse, and that I can't tell you how many times, and I'm sure my colleagues here on the panel will agree. All we hear is there's not enough research, and yet we're prohibited from doing research. So, I think that it is time to break out of that, and let's get the research done so that all of us can know who we can help. I do think that, remember, we don't treat in cannabis medicine, we don't treat the disease necessarily, we treat the patient. Because different people respond to different whole plants. You can't say that, oh, we've developed this one product and it's going to treat all children with Dravet syndrome. I haven't seen that. Yes, there are certain products that help children with Dravet, but certainly we are not seeing a one-size-fits-all approach or result. So I think the future is getting doctors to accept it, and I'm just starting with Americans for Safe Access to try to educate medical students and residents at no cost to them about the endocannabinoid system and about cannabis as medicine. How are we putting out year after year new doctors that are not being educated in this, when it is clearly part of now most people's on the table as an option. So we need to get doctors, more educated. And again, I can't do it myself. There's only a handful of us doctors that are kind of considered, to be cannabis specialists. But the good news is I'm seeing so much interest from my colleagues in the medical field.
Have we figured out cloning, Dr. Goldstein, so we could clone you and then have a? No, we haven't got there yet.
My husband would be horrified.
We won't do that
would
then.
Be too much.
Too much. Is it an education gap or is it a policy regulatory gap right now? Like if enough physicians had the education on the endocannabinoid system, could that create a groundswell to change the legislation? Or is it like, no, it's not, the education's not going to happen until there's,
yeah. I think doctors are motivated. I think most doctors want to help their patients. And I think when they hear their patients saying, oh, doctor, what do you think about CBD? Or oh, you know what? I don't need my Xanax anymore because I'm using medical cannabis. You don't have to write that prescription. It has to register at some point if you're listening to your patients. I think there's unfortunately leftover fear that you can get in trouble for recommending medical cannabis to your patients. However, most physicians don't even know that there is a precedent case called Conant versus Walters that protects your free speech with patients. You are allowed, basically that case affirmed the right of physicians to have this protected relationship where you can be honest with your patient about medical cannabis and say, I do think this might benefit you. Maybe I'm not a specialist in it, but I do think you should pursue it. And I'd like to be part of it. Many people are still afraid to talk to their doctors. There was a survey that showed that elderly people are afraid to ask their doctors because, remember, elderly people lived through the 60s and 70s, and they do not want to be labeled a stoner or a pothead. And they are terrified that if they talk to their physician about it, that they will be labeled and then treated differently. And so we have to just kind of get past that. It's time. Let's get past it. Let's move into this world of science and understand what these cannabinoids can do as, again, just another medicine that can help people have a better quality of life.
That case you mentioned, Dr. Goldstein, would it work, or does it apply in the context? Let's say you were a physician at a children's hospital, Los Angeles, Pennsylvania, Colorado, and there were policies. A lot of children's hospitals have policies where they're like, we're just not going to go there. Good luck, parents. And it's the parents' quote decision, but the physicians are not giving any guidance or recommendation, even though I believe
Right.
many of them know. Many of them know. But is that the case something where that they should feel that they have more ability, more, I guess, maybe just ability, or there's not the liability there that they
Right.
could say, look, we recommend or advise this, and it's not going to get involved with some larger policy or federal issue. Like, is
Right.
there a protection there from liability?
Yes, there is protection. You are not allowed to be federally prosecuted. And I don't think any state with medical cannabis laws, as long as you're a physician in good standing, that you're going and you're following standard of care that's been outlined for medical cannabis, that you're going to risk your livelihood by losing your license or have charges brought up against. It's all about doing the right thing and being a patient advocate. If I am not a person who, if a hospital told me you can't talk about that when there exists a case precedent that says I'm allowed to have free speech with my patients, then I am going to have that free speech. Now, they may be able to say, we don't want you writing the recommendation letter or helping that patient access, and maybe that's something that a hospital has. I'm not an attorney, so I don't know if a hospital can tell you to do that, but there are federal protections in place for physicians to be able to at least have the conversation, as long as the conversation is based in truth and fact. And so you can say, you know what, we only have Epidiolex studies for Dravet and this, but I do think in your child's particular case, it might help. Doctors are allowed to have that opinion. That's your professional medical opinion.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for sharing that. And we're going to jump from that more practitioner, what could be more of the pharmaceutical prescriptions recommendation world or swim lane, over to Janelle, where she's been really pioneering that natural product, that supplement swim lane. What have you seen there, Janelle? And also, what do you think is going to happen? Like, where are we going? All the people that are listening that have CBD or cannabinoid or hemp-derived product companies, where should they be looking for the opportunity in that swim lane, the swim lane where you've been?
I mean, it's extremely challenging right now, and probably the biggest challenge is the FDA not coming out with a clear way to regulate these CBD products that are currently on the market without a prescription. And so ideally what the industry is pushing towards, and I think Congress has just dropped a new recent bill that would instruct the FDA to regulate CBD as a dietary supplement or food product, depending on what avenue that you're putting that as any other ingredient that would go into a food or a supplement. So I think that that's the best scenario right now. The problem with the industry is that there are people that are not doing the right thing, and we know this. They're not in accordance with consumer packaged goods and supplements, in accordance with the way the FDA requires those particular products to be made to prove that they are safe and they have efficacy. So we're registered with the FDA as a 117 with a 111 arm, which means that we are a supplement and a food company. And we've been working with NSF for about a year now, a year and 2 months, ensuring that we're under CGMP compliance with the Food Modernization Act. I don't know a lot of companies that are doing that in this space, along with, our USDA organic certifications on all of our products, our grow, our processing plants, and we are vertically integrated. We do it all, which controls the supply chain. So that all being said, we have a lot of players in the CBD space in the supplement world that are not doing all of those things. I mean, I've seen people manufacturing products in the back of their greenhouses, and you just can't do that. Like, you're risking the consumer's health when you do something like that, and you're harming the industry. We have to protect ourselves as consumer packaged goods players. We need to be on the same standard as everyone else that's producing a product that puts on a shelf, whether it's a supplement or a food product. And I think the FDA has done us an injustice. It's time that they come out and regulate this. And how that regulation, I think, looks is going to be, when it comes down to it, the different types of compounds that in it. Is isolate really a pharmaceutical model? Does that fall into that drug lane? Or dosing? If we're suggesting a 50 milligram use and Epidiolex is suggesting 400, then there's a very clear lane of what should be a supplement and what should be a drug. I mean, this has been done before. This is not novel. And I think it's time that we start looking at what lane that we need to be in as supplement providers. I mean, we call us plant science. We're not chemical-based science. I got into this because the pharmaceutical industry failed my child, and I started looking at Eastern medicine and plant-based therapies and diets and combining all of those things together, mineral therapies, all these things as a whole is what got Harmony where she is today to 12 years old. It wasn't just a one shoe fits all. It wasn't just CBD. And so I think that there's definitely a lane for supplements, and that's the lane that we want to play in, and over-the-counter drugs. I mean, we are looking at OTCs right now. We're looking at pushing forward to become an OTC facility. And in order for us to do that, we have to have research. We've got to have research to prove that CBD can make structure function claims. And so it's like Dr. Rousseau and Dr. Goldstein spoke about. It is very difficult right now. Even though we've legalized hemp, there's still these roadblocks in our way that we can't get out of the observational research in the United States. Like, we've got to stop this. We've got to be able to start doing the research we need to make the structure function claim. I know for a fact, Harmony CBD, it works as an immune boost. I know it because I've seen it with her. It helped her. She's not been sick in 5 years, can't get a cold. I know what it's done for her, but I can't say that. I can't say my product helps with your immune system because I can't do the research because the government is blocking it.
What do you mean the government is blocking it?
It's just they're still classifying it as a controlled substance. I mean, there's the DEA, I think it's very telling when they came out with their interim ruling, which we sued them over. There's still no legal pathway in accordance with the FDA. I mean, the FDA has to step up. We have legalized hemp. Congress has legalized it. If we derive a derivative from a hemp plant, it should be a legal product. Now it is up to the FDA to regulate the products that are being put on the market. And that's where we're at. We're stuck in this conundrum.
It brings up something to me, Janelle, and I'd like to have everyone weigh in on this because it kind of gets to the crux of what I think is going on here. And that's, we have this patent that was done by the US government, Health and Human Services. That's the US government. And they're saying we've done this research and we are calling cannabinoids neuroprotectants. And we know where cannabinoids primarily come from, medical cannabis, from hemp. And yet we have a Schedule I substance, marijuana, that has, quote, no medical benefit, is highly addictive. And there just seems like an enormous contradiction there. 20 years ago, the US government saying, we know this is working. In fact, we're going to put out patents that then, scientists and researchers like Dr. Rousseau are going to work with to develop drugs that are now selling $500 million every year and being acquired for over $7 billion. So that's working. That's working. But yet, on the other hand, with medical cannabis, people cannot, in some cases, get access. And mine's a unique situation with my son at Children's Hospital in Colorado. But a lot of it, the underpinning is the federal state of marijuana as a Schedule I substance. So can you guys each, maybe we just go down the panel first, Dr. Rousseau, Dr. Goldstein, Janelle, like, do you have thoughts on that? That what appears to me, I'm not a doctor, I'm not a lawyer, I'm none of these things. I'm really just a parent like Janelle with a child, very, very sick child. But that contradiction is driving a lot of problems, is costing a lot of money, and institutions like Children's Hospital in Colorado, in Philadelphia, these groups are making a lot of money because we can't get access to something that the government said is helpful 20 years ago. So if you guys could each kind of weigh in on that. Maybe I'm just getting a little bit excited about this, but is there a systematic contradiction there?
Absolutely. This has been the story of my life for 25 years. First, people need to understand the historical underpinnings of this. Cannabis was made Schedule I in the Controlled Substances Act of 1970. It was put in Schedule I as a placeholder pending the results of what was called the Schaefer Commission. They scientifically looked at the evidence and came out with cannabis should be decriminalized and made medically available. But thanks to Richard Nixon, he vetoed that, and it's been in Schedule I ever since. People, again, need to understand that this is a political decision that has nothing whatever to do with science. because the idea that cannabis is dangerous, addictive, and has no recognized medical use is not true, never was true, never will be true. But that's the state of the law, and short of Congress doing something about it, it won't change. And again, one of the byproducts is the roadblocks to research and frustrated parents whose children might be helped by access to these medicines. And sometimes, unless they do it on their own, it's just not going to happen for them.
When and if they can do it on their own in some situations.
Oh, absolutely.
Dr. Goldstein,
It's easy.
yeah, what about you? Do you have thoughts on this? I call it a contradiction, but maybe there's a better way
Well,
to.
I think the better word is hypocrisy.
Yeah.
You take out a patent on something as a neuroprotectant, and then you say and on the other hand, you say it has no medical value. So look, we live in a country where alcohol and tobacco kill millions of people, where we have, as a pediatrician, what I see and saw in my career, underage use of, everybody thinks that kids are, smoking pot and ruining their lives. It's alcohol and getting into the parents' pills. I worked pediatric emergency medicine for 13 years. Legal substances is what put teenagers in the hospital. So this whole idea that if you legalize cannabis, you're opening this can of worms, or deschedule it, I should say, you're opening this can of worms. First of all, cannabis is ubiquitous. You can find it. I talked to a family the other day with a 13-year-old who's buying it off the street. Don't tell me kids can't get it. That's not going to change. It was that way when I was a kid. It's going to be that way. But the whole point is that by continuing this madness, we are harming patients by not being able to do the valuable research that needs to be done.
Thank you, Dr. Goldstein. Okay, Janelle, last word for you here. Parent like myself with a very sick child. What do you make of all this? And then maybe you can end it with where should we be going in terms of the legislation? And then where do you think we're going to be going? And I'm talking specifically with DEA, FDA, and medical cannabis either being descheduled or some way this hypocrisy, as Dr. Goldstein called it, being eliminated.
Well, I mean, I don't know if everyone knows, but I'm in South Carolina and medical marijuana is illegal here. And I have a not-for-profit, Compassionate SC, which is a patients advocacy group I founded. And we've been fighting for the medical marijuana bill here for 6 years. We are now probably a year and a half to potentially getting it passed. So that's where we are here. It's still a scheduled drug. I cannot use it, but I can use hemp. I was 2 weeks ago, I was actually at a conference on a panel with Senator Wyden, and him and Schumer and Booker are dropping a bill that's going to deschedule, I want to emphasize this, deschedule all cannabis. So it will no longer be on the schedule. They feel, I have not seen the language in the bill yet, they feel like it's going to get the momentum it needs with this with this administration to actually get it passed. I think that is probably the right way to go. If we're going to talk about cannabis as a whole, it needs to be descheduled, period. But is that a reality? I don't know. I mean, when you talk about there are constituents in the cannabis plant that do have psychotropic effects, and that is where the fear lies. So we have to get people over that fear and understanding that this is also medicine, and it helps alleviate people's suffering. I think the most important bill right now, if you're talking about the CBD and hemp legislation, is the bill that is just actually been presented, that is going to actually instruct the FDA to regulate it just like a supplement or dietary supplement. And I think that that's probably extremely important. And then you have the banking bill, which we all need. Everyone needs to be able to bank in the industry if you're going to have a viable industry. So that's kind of the future pathway forward. We know where the history is. I think Dr. Rousseau said it perfectly clear. I mean, we know where we've been, and we should not be, repeating the same mistakes we've made in the past. We've grown. We know the science is there. We've grown. We've all grown as humans, and we've come a lot more mature. And we need to now understand that we made mistakes in the past. This should not have been put on as a Schedule I drug, and we need to fix it. We need to move forward and fix it. And it's going to be up to Congress. Congress has to do it, but it has to be done right too, Sean.
If cannabis, marijuana as it's defined in law, if it were descheduled, would that create a boom? Would that boom healthcare? Would that boom research? Would that be a massive event in American society, culture, science, research, medical? Like what? Or would it come and go? Like what? And we'll go right back up the top to Dr. Rousseau, and that will be the last word from Dr. Rousseau. Like what would that mean if medical cannabis, or even just all of marijuana, was descheduled? What would that mean economically, medically, whatever each one of you wants to speak to? What would that mean?
Well, it'd be revolutionary, and it's going to add a tremendous number of jobs. It's going to improve the public health. It's going to allow us to advance the kind of research on the 148 other cannabinoids that we want to learn about and harness medically. So yeah, it's what I think we all pray for. So we will see, but I expect it to be revolutionary.
Everyone, let's end it on prayers and a revolution for healthcare right there. So thank you all so much. Profound appreciation for the three of you joining. You are the world's leading experts on this topic. And I hope the guests and all those listening now and whoever hear this in the future that your words are not lost. So thank you very much. And it's very appreciated. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Sean, this
Thank
was
you.
great.
See you.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thanks,
Bye.
guys.